You first.
Right. All right. Good evening. We're going to call the meeting to order. Welcome, everyone, to the Birmingham Public School District's School Board meeting. Tonight is Tuesday, the 27th of November. It is 5 p.m., and we are actually going to start with a candidate interview for the superintendent search, and then at that point, we will take a recess, and then we will move into our regular meeting at 7 p.m. So with that, Fran, would you please conduct roll call?
Here. Here.
Here.
Here.
Here. Here. Thank you, Fran. Before we get started with our interview, are there any public comments? Seeing none, we will then begin the interview process. Trustees, before we introduce our candidate, I would like you to each introduce yourself and give a brief introduction of who you are and children in the district, et cetera, et cetera. Brian, why don't we start with you?
Hi, Brian Jennings. I've had 4 children go through the Birmingham school. We have 2 in college, and we have 2 that are in 10th grade at Seaholm, and I've been on the board for 2.5 years. And my brother has 2 children that went through Walled Lake Western, and one is still there. He's a senior at Walled Lake.
Fantastic. Nice to meet you.
Hi, my name is Jessica Thomas. I've been on the board for 4 years. This is the end of my term, so I am transitioning off. I have a daughter that has gone through the district and graduated from Seaholm some years back. Happy to have you, and we're looking forward to this time to learn more about who you are.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Hi, and welcome. My name is Lori Jaluni. I am in my ending my second year, beginning my 3rd year as a trustee. I've also been an educator in Birmingham Public Schools for the past almost 31 years. And this is a wonderful place to be. I'm looking forward to getting to know you better. So welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, Chris, again. We had talked a little bit. As you know, I have a daughter in Groves, a son at Berkshire, and similar to Brian, Lori, and Adrian, we're in our going into our 3rd year as trustees. And again, welcome.
Thank you.
So as Kim mentioned, we were elected as the group of 4 elected in 2016. My name's Adrian Young. I have 2 boys. One's 2.5 and one's 8 months, so neither are advanced enough to be currently enrolled in the district. But you know, I'm working on it every day.
We care right here. Right around the corner is We Care.
Right.
Hi, I'm Walter Rothschild, been a trustee for 4 years. I have 3 children who have come through the Birmingham Public Schools. My youngest graduated from Seaholm last year, end of last year.
Great. Thank you.
Dr. Delgado, I'm Steve Scheit, 8 years on the school board. Welcome. Welcome back.
Thank you.
I know you have some Birmingham history.
I do.
My wife and I, who are both Birmingham Public School grads, have 3 children that went through the school district. Now empty nesters, and like Jessica and Walter, departing the board come January. But welcome. Great to have you. Great to have you here.
Great, thank you. And with that, Chris, if you don't mind, we will turn it over to you, introducing Dr. Chris Delgado. And if you want to start with an opening remark, that would be great.
Thank you. Well, good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. I do have an opening statement, if you will. By my resume, you know that I'm Chris Delgado. I'm serving in my 8th year as the Deputy Superintendent of the Walled Lake Consolidated School District. We are a very diverse district of over 14,000 students in 19 schools. We span 55 square miles from Wixom all the way up to Waterford. My primary responsibility there as Deputy Superintendent is to oversee the day-to-day operations of the district, particularly the 19 schools, as well as the special education department with about 2,000 students with IEPs. I'm married to my wonderful wife, Leslie. We just celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary this past summer. She is a teacher, instructional specialist at West Maple, and we also have 3 children who have gone through or are in the Birmingham district. We have Antonio, who's a senior at Michigan State, and Cassandra, who's a sophomore at NYU in Manhattan. And they are both Groves graduates, and we have Dominic, who is a junior at Groves, just finishing wrestling practice probably right now. So I've applied for your superintendency for a couple of key reasons. First of all, frankly, I love the Birmingham School District for what it's done for my wife and I professionally and the incredible education it's provided for our children. It literally changed our lives when we moved back from Colorado, where we started our teaching career, to Birmingham Public Schools to both work and teach here. I have a vested interest in the future of this district, and there would be no greater honor than to give back to this school community through service as your superintendent. Secondly, personally, I understand this district well. I shared with you in the cover letter, the documents, several people from the Birmingham family as references who know me, who've encouraged me to apply for this position, who I've worked with, who know me personally and professionally. I grew up in Southfield, just down the street, 8.5 mile in Evergreen, and taught at Seaholm and Beverly Elementary. Our children attended the West Maple Berkshire Groves route, and my wife Leslie taught at Covington before going to West Maple. So we know the district well. Professionally, reflecting on my experiences working in 4 districts in 2 different states, in Colorado and obviously here in Michigan, I've experienced a broad range of issues and dynamics, from the poverty, gang violence, and food insecurity of Colorado Springs, the district I worked in, to the relative affluence of Bloomfield Hills, and now just the magnitude of such a large district like Walled Lake. I've experienced many, many challenges, and I found that I've been able to be successful in all those districts because I've learned a couple key things. Number one, wherever you go, kids are kids. They want connections, they want support, and they want encouragement. Parents want to be heard, and they want to be involved in any community, and that's when you have a strong community, when you have parent involvement. And teachers want to be treated like professionals and supported. And so I guess in my mind, when a superintendent leads with that perspective, it goes a long way towards establishing those deep and lasting relationships that really benefit a school community. And so for that reason and so many others, I believe that my background will transfer well to the Birmingham school community as well. Thank you for having me.
Great, thank you. All right, Trustee Scheit, would you like to kick off the questions,
Happy
please?
to. So we're just going to round robin right around the table with a question and then circle back for a second and hopefully a third round, right, if we have time. Dr. Delgado, let's start with curriculum, right? It's at the heart of what we do, teaching and learning. It's all about instruction. A couple of parts to this question, all related to curriculum. If you could talk about how you would evaluate the content and the effectiveness of the curriculum that we currently have when you come to Birmingham, how would you go about assessing that, number one? Number two, what's your philosophy or approach on curriculum design, right? What do you think the key components, the key drivers are to revise and design curriculum? And number three, maybe comment, if you haven't already, on how the different stakeholders play in curriculum assessment and curriculum design, whether that's teachers, students, parents, administrators, what have you, right? How they fit in that curriculum development process. That'd be great.
Sure, sure. So let me start obviously with the evaluation of the content. So the first thing that you really need to do is look at those who are in charge of your curriculum department and talk to them about kind of their assessment of where we are district-wide, how that aligns with the district goals, how it aligns with your strategic plan in terms of the content that you're looking to deliver and the kind of efficacy of the programs thus far. When you evaluate any kind of curricular framework, you really kind of look at, starting with kind of a curriculum map, if you will. What are we ensuring in terms of a guaranteed and viable curriculum for all students? Are we delivering that with fidelity? And if not, where are the gaps in our learning? And so part of the evaluation is looking systematically at the entire framework of what we're supposed to be delivering and seeing the extent to which we are delivering it. Obviously, part of the evaluation is the data analysis too. Scores aren't everything. It's not the be-all and end-all, but if you have periodic benchmarks that are supposed to gauge your progress towards, again, an efficient implementation with fidelity, you should realize the results of the program. With respect to design, one of the things actually that I do, I teach at Madonna University. One of the courses I teach is a course called Vision into Action, which is about program evaluation and design. And when you look at kind of how you design programs, how you approach that, you start with kind of an exploration of the program and long before you get to an adoption. You know, that design process should look at current research. It should look at proven methods that are not only around the state, but even globally in some cases, and really making sure that you're selecting, before you design curriculum, that you're selecting models that have worked in other districts and other places that you can implement that. And part of that design process has to involve stakeholders. You know, the practitioners who are delivering this, your teachers, are at the ground level. We have to talk to teachers to get their perspective about the implementation of this. The student voice. Sometimes we lose student voice. We forget about student voice. We don't survey them. We don't ask them enough about their experiences, and not just if they like the course or don't, but what specifically is frustrating to them or what is encouraging to them. And so student voice has to be a part of any kind of evaluation and design. And then obviously your administrators. You know, from a superintendent standpoint and from a deputy superintendent standpoint, I oversee all the principals. And so we need them to be the ones to hold everyone accountable for the effective implementation of that. And so they need to be involved too in ensuring that we're doing what we intended to do. So I know it's a multi-part question, but you know, if I were to come in, I would meet with Dr. Hoffman and his team and understand from a district standpoint where the curriculum is, any issues that exist, and kind of look at that design process, and are we asking the right people to get their voices into the part of our conversation for program evaluation.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Delgado, I'm going to make the assumption that you've looked at our strategic plan.
I have.
And we have, we're actually coming to the end of the
Correct.
Strategic plan. Myself and some others in the community have questioned how we measure the success of that strategic plan. What are the metrics? And there are some questions about whether it really is measurable. I'd like to hear a little bit about your thoughts on the existing strategic plan. There are many components of it that the community was involved in crafting, and we find them very valuable as far as values in the district. But could you talk a little bit about how you might address the topic of establishing a new strategic plan, what kind of methodology you might use to do that, and what some of the major components of such a plan might be, including how it would be measured from a success standpoint?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, I have definitely been involved in a variety of strategic plan type evaluations and accreditations. So whether it's through advanced ed and the outcomes accreditation or performance accreditation, or actually a district doing their own strategic plan, really what it comes down to is kind of what we call the MVVG work, the mission, vision, values, and goal work. And so when I look at Birmingham's strategic plan, I'm really impressed by how well you've identified kind of your mission to inspire all children to positively impact the world, and tied that to the vision and your core values, getting down to the actual goals. Now the goals in terms of metrics, sometimes with strategic plans as well as accreditation, it is a little nebulous. It's tough to sometimes measure specifically. But for example, your first goal, talking about having students excel in a learning environment that is engaging and free of achievement gaps. Well, achievement gaps is certainly something that we can measure. It's something that we can try to address. There's a lot of experience that I've had with trying to address the achievement gap, going back to actually the Minority Student Achievement Network that I know Birmingham is a part of. I was involved in that for years ago. So you can measure that, you can kind of address that through some of the work. Some of the other aspects, words like helping children to reach their potential, those are tough to measure. And so when you look at a new strategic plan, it's assigning metrics to that, designing what exactly do we mean by that? What is their potential? Is there a certain amount of advanced placement or honors courses we think all students should have experience to? However we define it, we add those metrics. And so whatever the new plan is, it's talking about how exactly you want to measure that so we can report out. The third goal, talking about empathy and ethical leadership. So this has been a hallmark for Birmingham schools with character education when you look at your goals going back for decades. And so if you tie that to some of the social justice work that we do and teaching about kind of being empathetic and compassionate to other folks, again, how you measure it, we need to define that. How we expose kids to those positive behavior intervention strategies and the character education, that's still important. And then the fourth one is talking about kind of unlimited opportunities, dynamic educational organization. So that gets back to kind of maintaining your well-rounded holistic education. You could measure that by looking at students' schedules in their 4 years. What have they been taking? Finding avenues for them to take areas that they're very passionate about. Some of the work that I do in Walled Lake is I oversee the guidance counseling program for all our secondary counselors. And we've worked really hard on, if you're familiar with what's the personal curriculum model. So back when the Michigan Merit Curriculum changed the high school graduation requirements, it made it very difficult for students to take the courses in 4 years to get through with classes that they were very passionate about and interested in. So we've been able to work with the personal curriculum flexibility, with Oakland Technical Campus flexibility, to allow students to pursue their interests, pursue their ambitions. And so I kind of digress a little bit, because I think that's a way you can measure if we value, going back to our core values, if we value all of these things through a strategic plan that we feel all students are entitled to, then we work together to put some metrics together. Now, I think it's an opportune time with 2018, with the strategic plan expiring. You've got a relatively new board, and with a new superintendent coming in to really kind of think about how we might approach it. We could look at advanced ed. If a strategic plan is not kind of the model that the district wants to go to, there are formal structures that you have advisors that help you with those metrics, or you could do another strategic plan yourself. But at the core, you have your mission, you have your vision, your core values are values that I believe in strongly: diversity, innovation, collaboration. So you have all of that in place. And so it just takes time for us to come together and decide how we would measure it and how we would move forward.
Quick follow-up on that. Would you consider components of a strategic plan to include financial health looking forward of the district? You mentioned the more academic focused as opposed to an ideological kind of platform, and you mentioned achievement gaps. Would you view that as something that would be a component piece of a strategic plan, to have specific goals from the starting point of where we are today with the achievement gaps?
Many districts do have financial goals as part of their district goals, as part of a strategic plan. We do have fiscal responsibility as part of one in Walled Lake that we actually measure. Unfortunately, we're in a different situation with fund balance. I know that you have a pretty healthy fund balance of about 15%. We're right at that 6% line, which, you know, the 5% is that trigger that we're trying to avoid. But yes, in answer to your question, I think that any kind of holistic strategic plan that looks at the health and viability of a district could and should include any a financial kind of goal, financial ambitions to stay within a certain threshold. And then part of that is also investing in, committing to investing in those pieces of the strategic plan that you value. It costs money to send people for training on certain aspects, whether it's the International Baccalaureate program or social justice training or restorative practices. And so you start with what you value, you look at what you can afford, and you put a plan together to make it happen.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Dr. Delgado, you've talked a lot about stakeholders and engagement, and I want to thank you for that. That's really important in this community. What I'm looking for is how and when you would engage community members and stakeholders, and I'm actually looking for specific examples. And then once you gather the perspectives of K-12 staff, parents, community members, how do you work to balance all of those? And then my final question is, you're left, usually inevitably, although I'm sure not in all cases, with one group or a couple of those groups being less than satisfied. What do you do? How do you communicate with that group or those groups moving forward?
Certainly. And I just wanted to clarify, we're talking, when we say community members, we're talking about community members and teachers, all stakeholders in the district. So let me start with the last part first, with who's not satisfied. Okay. Because when you're in leadership, you make decisions that don't satisfy people. You can have a disagreement or a different perspective on something. I think the answer to how you address those who are not satisfied with the decision is by maintaining a relationship with those people. You are the superintendent for this entire district, and you're the principal for an entire building. And so you owe it to everyone in the community to maintain those relationships. You can respectfully explain a rationale for a decision, and if somebody disagrees with it, you can take their feedback, you can listen to it, and you maintain that relationship. Indeed, every decision that I've made as a principal, as an assistant principal, certainly as a deputy superintendent, not everyone has agreed with. But I've done it professionally, I've done it with dignity, and I've practiced active listening. And so you maintain those relationships and that open dialogue and that continued conversation. And it's been my experience that when you maintain those conversations, at some point, there's a meeting of the minds. You have things that you can partner on that you understand, even if you may not agree on the initial issue. Getting back to how you engage people, superintendents need to be visible. They need to be in schools. They need to be out in the community. They need to immerse themselves in this entire role. This is a devotion. This isn't just a job. And so part of how I would plan on doing that is not only having kind of formal sessions, superintendent coffees with the community, out in the community at the Baldwin Library or other places, having kind of formal events, attending everything and anything to support children and families, partnering on community-based efforts. For example, in Walled Lake, we have a wonderful parenting fair that we do in conjunction with West Bloomfield. And, you know, we're always out in the community talking with members, giving them an opportunity to bend our ear kind of informally at these events. So you can have a balance of kind of formal venues, whether it's PTA events or community events or superintendent coffees, but then also kind of informal opportunities. The other thing is to have kind of open dialogue, sending in emails or phone calls to solicit that feedback. Now, how do you balance those competing interests? First of all, by respecting all of them as valid. We don't judge the validity of one over another. You validate them, you appreciate their suggestion, and if you may have to make a decision that prioritizes one thing over another, what I've always tried to do is try to explain rationale and explain my thinking to people. You're going to have competing interests. That's part of leadership. But the way that you say no is an art, and it has to be nuanced, and it has to be respectful and professional, so you can maintain that relationship to move forward. Because down the line, we may be able to partner on something else, even if we disagreed on one thing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I ask a follow-up question on yours, Adrian? So it's actually nice to know that you have so many of your own personal stakeholders in this district. Your son, your wife, and your son, who was in my class.
Yes.
Your wife teaching at West Maple. So you mentioned earlier that you had, as a building principal, as a deputy superintendent, you've got to make some tough decisions, and you will oftentimes get pushback. How have you handled that pushback? What have you done? What is your approach to handle that? Can you explain or do a little role play in a building setting and then in a larger district leadership team setting?
Sure. Well, let me think of the multitude of things. Here's a decision. When I got to Walled Lake, we had the International Baccalaureate program was just starting. And they had the middle years program, which is the middle school 6 through 10 program, and then the high school diploma program, which was an 11-12 program. And coming from Bloomfield Hills prior as an administrator for 8 years there, I had a lot of knowledge and information about the International Baccalaureate program and leading schools through that authorization process. To make a long story short, within a year or so of joining Walled Lake, I could see that the MYP program, the middle school program, was not going to be effective. Part of the challenge was we had 4 middle schools. We only had 1 middle school that was piloting the MYP, and those kids were not all going to the high school that had the IB program. So even though it was valuable for a certain group of those kids, there were students who were required to take classes that were not going to benefit them in high school. So I made the very tough decision to talk to our board. We were spending a lot of money on it, on the MYP program, to talk to our superintendent, to talk to our principal, to talk to the teachers who had done hours and hours of training on this pedagogy, to recommend to our Board of Education that we eliminate the MYP program. And that was huge for me to do in the first, or I think, second year of my tenure as deputy superintendent. But I was honest about why I felt this. I valued the training that the teachers had received, and I encouraged them that even without the structure of the MYP, the training, that deeper learning, I know Birmingham's involved in deep learning, and so, you know, any of these, the cultures of thinking, deep learning, International Baccalaureate, that training could still be applied to their classrooms. And so there was a lot of pushback. Teachers were angry. They were mad because we invested in that. Some of the parents were very angry because their kids now were not able to have that same experience and get that kind of certification, 610 certification, before they went to the IB. So again, I was respectful. I explained rationale. My conversation with our Board of Education was, this is not going to be sustainable for these reasons, and this is the amount of money we're spending on it. And so ultimately, we voted to eliminate the MYP. Now, what did I do after that? And I think this is really critical in any kind of conflict or issue. I kept coming back to the building. I maintained the relationship with the teacher. I worked with the principal on the transition, and people saw me. When people see you, they trust you, and they hear from you, and they see that you're supportive and empathetic. And so I didn't go back to my office and let them struggle with kind of the remnants of the MYP. We phased in some scheduling things for parents where their kids could take certain classes for 2 more years. For example, world language is a 5-year program with the International Baccalaureate. So we didn't phase it out. We kept those language programs so they could get those extra 2 years of world language. So you work with parents, you work with teachers, you work with principals, but ultimately, I made that decision. And you have to make those kind of decisions. So that's one example of how I think I addressed a situation fairly well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Much of the role that a superintendent plays is internal and external, right? You have stakeholders in the community, you have stakeholders in the buildings, you have stakeholders in dealing with operations and such. So
Sure.
I would like to hear or better understand your approach, or maybe the balance and how you balance internal issues versus external. How do you balance internal operations? Would that be a 40% internal operations, 60% external building relationships in the community? What's your balance on that, and how do you typically approach that balancing act?
First of all, you don't go into these jobs for a 9 to 5. You work all the time, and you're at peace with that. You have balance to the extent that you can, but you work constantly. What you do is you prioritize your time during the day when you can get out to the people that you need to. So for example, as a principal, I probably spent 60–70% of my day out of my office in classrooms, meeting with teachers, meeting with parents, in IEP meetings and other meetings. And then after everyone left, then I would have a few hours to do email, do phone calls, those kind of things. In terms of what I'm doing now as a deputy superintendent, I have an enormous challenge. I have 19 schools that I need to oversee, as well as the special education program and athletics and many other things. And so, again, similarly, I'm almost never in my office. I'm out around the district. I'm visiting schools. You need to be incredibly organized and meticulous in your planning, which I am. I think it was like a 12-step program to get rid of my Franklin planner. But I have color-coded calendars. Now I like Outlook, and so I have color-coded calendars for my personal, my professional aspects. But I track all the buildings I go to. I track the programs I go to, and I make sure that I get there as often as I can throughout the semester. In terms of kind of handling issues, some external issues come up, like a safety threat. You know, I oversee safety for the district. We're stepping into ALICE. I know you're doing ALICE training as well. But some things take priority, and then you just have to launch into action. And there's a lot of work that happens before that in setting up protocols with your staff, making sure everybody knows what's expected of them, how we follow procedures and protocols. So externally, you know, getting on the calendars, making sure I'm at community events, making sure that I prioritize those. Again, it goes back to being ready to immerse yourself in a community. I think I'm at a stage now with 2 kids in college and 1 independent junior in high school that I can be the superintendent that I want to be, that I know you need to be, in order to balance all of those internal and external needs.
How do you factor in long-term strategic planning when it's triage all the time?
Well, I'm a systems guy. I'm a systems thinker, and so this is my 8th year in Walled Lake. And so obviously with a multitude of things that I have to oversee, I have been able to, with a lot of other people, develop systems that function very, very efficiently. And so it feels sometimes like triage, but I wouldn't characterize the job an administrator's job as triage if you have systems in place that can kind of approach them. There's almost nothing that I haven't dealt with in my role as assistant principal, principal, or deputy. I'm no longer stressed or anxious about it because I've done it. We launch into action, and you have the systems in place. And so I feel confident that I would be able to do the same.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Delgado, thank you for being here tonight. I was just wondering, just a quick answer, how do you maintain a collaborative relationship with the teachers union? You know, how have you done that in the past, and how do you see it going in the future?
I know I've been a little verbose, so I'll be more succinct on this one. So basically by maintaining relationships and frequent meetings. And in all the experience I've had as a building administrator and as a deputy, I've never had a grievance filed. I'm on the negotiations team for Walled Lake. I was on the negotiations team for Bloomfield Hills. I work very collaboratively with our union executive team. I respect them, and we work professionally. I think the whole notion, when you look at collective bargaining, the idea of bargaining in good faith, that phrase means something to me, is that you're being honest with people, that there isn't this gamesmanship back and forth. And so I think part of maintaining those relationships are meeting with them frequently, maintaining that relationship, being honest, and collaborating on things. And that's worked for me in my success with working with unions, with many different collective bargaining organizations.
Thank you.
Round two.
Round two.
So, Dr. Delgado, can you compare and contrast the strengths and weaknesses of the Franklin Planner system versus Microsoft Outlook?
Got the notice to refill my planner, but
I was a daytimer guy way back, but I date myself. Let's talk about character education. You touched on it earlier in one of your answers. I'm sure you're familiar with some of the work we do here. We've used character.org for almost 20 years now, their 11 principles framework. Their work has evolved over a period of years. Our implementation has evolved over a period of years. It's a point of pride, but we can always get better. What I want to understand is your philosophy, your thoughts about the role of character work in a public school system, first. Second, if you've had any experience with that, either at Bloomfield or Walled Lake or along the way. And third, again, put yourself in the superintendent chair. What do you think going forward for Birmingham? How do we take it to the next level? What are your thoughts about how we could do something more, different, better? Be much appreciated.
Sure. Well, again, if I can, I'll start with the last question in terms of the next level. I noticed that you have one of your schools that's, I think it's Beverly, that's working on the ruler with a grant from Yale, which is the social emotional learning. Some of the next steps or the next level for school districts is really to look at the social emotional learning component. As I talk to kindergarten teachers and elementary principals around our district, the complexity of children that are coming to school with trauma and with pain and challenges is markedly different. They're experiencing more social emotional challenges. When we look at kind of middle schoolers and high schoolers, the amount of anxiety and pressure that are on the kids and depression. The next steps for any district to take any kind of character education coupled with that social emotional learning is to look at aspects like Ruler, which is an excellent program. There are programs that give structure in the same way that character.org does, in the same way that the Covey leadership traits do, the IB learning profile traits. They're all getting at the same piece of systematically teaching these behaviors. Circling back to philosophy, I always respected the emphasis on character education in Birmingham because I believe it is part of a public school district. If you look at any public school district's mission, there's at some point there's always some aspect of teaching kids how to be good citizens and being part of our democracy and participative people. And so character education matters. For years now, probably over a decade, schools have had positive behavior intervention systems that have tried to get at that. My experience in Walled Lake is very much the same. I've worked with all of our 12 elementary principals than the secondary principals, but to really look at different aspects of programs. We don't micromanage or dictate from a central office that thou must do the Ruler or the Covey learning traits, but what I share with the principals is this matters enough for the health and wellness of the students, but to support your teachers who are dealing with them, I want to encourage you to try to pursue things. So we have a couple of our schools, for example, that are Leader in Me schools. If you're familiar with the Leader in Me program, we have a brand new school, brand new principal who started the Positivity Project, which is another program. And so when you look at those and encourage your principals to do that, that's kind of the experience that I've done in Walled Lake. And we've really had kind of a rich emphasis on that. The other thing that I think is really important is, and impressive here in Birmingham that's unique, is that you have your CSOs, both at the middle school and at the high school level, to have the community school organizers and the community service organizers at the high school. Most school districts don't have those. And so that aspect of giving back to the community and teaching that character. Sometimes as kids get older, they're less and less apt to want to care about others or be empathetic to others, but I think part of those efforts really kind of prioritizes it, and more authentically, more sincerely than you need to do 20 hours of community service before you graduate. Some of the programs like experiential learning. My daughter participated in going to New Orleans with Habitat for Humanity, and that changed the way she viewed things. And so I think that philosophically, you need a superintendent who supports that for the right reasons to teach kids. I've had experience with that, and the next level really gets into some of the kind of social emotional trauma and pain that a lot of kids are coming to school with.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Delgado, Adrian had asked earlier a little bit about community engagement, and along those lines, could you talk a little bit about how you view the role of a superintendent relative to public discourse on legislative issues, broad political discourse, ideological public discourse and debate, and what the role of a superintendent is relative to public communications, whether it be with the media or through the formal and informal engagement with the community?
Sure. So first and foremost, I think that your superintendent should be prepared to speak with the media on any issue related to the school district. On occasion, you might see board members that speak to the media. For example, there's a board policy that was passed, but typically your superintendent should be prepared to be the person who speaks to the community. Politically, a superintendent needs to be very, very aware of the potential impact of legislative decisions on public education and on your specific district. Ironically, tomorrow I'm going to be in Lansing all day with superintendents from all around the state, hearing from legislators about the potential impact of the lame duck session on public policy and on public education. So I will be up there to be educated about that and to come back and share that with our principal. So I think the role of the superintendent in that kind of public discourse at the board table and then in community sessions is to educate people about politically what's happening I think within the framework of with respect to public education. You always have to be careful about kind of the partisanship and the political aspect and sharing your personal opinions about things, because you're always going to be viewed as representing the school district, and so there needs to be a fine line between that when you're having conversation. But the other role is to help your principals and your teachers understand the do's and don'ts of kind of that advocacy. I think it's fine for superintendents to advocate for public education. We believe in public education. We look at some of the challenges legislatively, and I'm a little worried about what I'm going to see tomorrow with lame duck about what might be pushed through, but the systematic defunding of education, kind of the public scrutiny and the perception that people have of public education, I think superintendents should speak out strongly about the value of public education, because it's one of our "this I believe" statements. So I think with respect to media and communications, part of what I'm envisioning, and if I have the opportunity to come back to share my 90-day plan with you at the next meeting, part of my 90-day plan is to look at making those connections in the community. In Walled Lake, we know all the reporters for the local papers. We have good relationships with them. We talk to them about not only getting stories out, but if they have questions about policy, of having that open dialogue. But your superintendent should be comfortable in all of those roles, speaking with the media, but just being very careful about partisan politics.
Thank you.
Sure.
I know you mentioned earlier that part of your job as deputy sup right now is overseeing the special education department.
Yes.
And I was interested in learning a little more about that experience and specifically what ideas you have or successes you've had raising achievement for that particular group, whether it be students with IEPs or 504 plans. And if you haven't yet experienced success in doing that, what are some ideas or innovative approaches you think could be successful here in Birmingham?
Sure. So first and foremost, when you look at any student with an IEP, you need to look at their individual goals. My own son, my youngest son, has an IEP at Groves, and so we've been through the process. The staff has been fantastic throughout the entire district about focusing on his individual goals and making sure he understands them, and as he's gotten older, to advocate more on behalf of his own goals. What I've been able to do in Walled Lake are a couple things. We're focusing very, very intently on specialized instruction. And so if any of you are familiar with kind of the LRC process or the classrooms, oftentimes those classrooms, and this isn't Birmingham, this is everywhere, they become more of homework kind of study halls where kids will go and they'll get their homework done. They might have a little extra time on a test, but most of us, that's the way we did business in schools, right? Specialized instruction, and we partner with Oakland schools on that. We partner with MACE, the state organization. The whole idea of specialized instruction, of maximizing that LRC time and then expanding that to the classroom where the teachers, the gen ed teachers are partnering, actively partnering with teachers to focus on individual goals and what that student specifically needs is making a difference. We've had modest gains in our M-STEP scores and our graduation rate over the last several years because we focused on specialized instruction. We've also tried to improve our co-teaching model. So co-teaching, if you're familiar with co-teaching, you'll have a special education teacher and a gen ed teacher. Oftentimes the gen ed teacher really is the quote-unquote real teacher, and the special ed teacher feels that they're just behavior control. And that's what people have shared with me. When I was assistant principal at Andover, that's what our department chairs shared with me. When you have authentic co-teaching, where you're collaborating, you're both teaching, you're doing specialized instruction, that makes a difference. But again, you have to give planning time, you need to support teachers, and not only share that expectation, but support them. The other thing that we've done, I mentioned before, is our flexibility with the Michigan Merit Curriculum. So one of the main goals was our graduation rate for students with IEPs. And so we looked at very flexible options with the personal curriculum and the Oakland technical campuses. I think the Oakland technical campuses are a gem in our county that are really underutilized. And now with the PC opportunity, there are several replacement courses that you can use for OTEC, where students will not have to struggle through, say, Algebra 2 when they can pursue a culinary arts degree or an auto tech degree or a cosmetology degree, and they can get that math embedded. And so we've tried Oakland Technical Campus, personal curriculums, flexible options, remediated courses, and then from a staff standpoint, really digging into co-teaching and specialized instruction, and we've made some gains. We have a brand new director. She's in her first year, and she comes with a background from the intermediate school district. So she knows about compliance, she knows about the best practices, and we're trying to train a huge staff with 2,000 students with IEPs, but modestly we're making some gains.
Thank you. And I just have a quick follow-up question. You talked about increasing students' understanding and exposure to the Oakland Technical Campus. Mm-hmm. Have you seen in Walled Lake that there's an increase in attendance mostly for students with IEPs or 504s, or has Walled Lake been successful in opening everyone's eyes to the benefits of Oakland Tech?
It's a great question, and the answer is no, not necessarily just for special education students, and here's why. Philosophically, we need to change the paradigm of thinking that university is for everybody, that that's where everybody needs to get to. There are many students who need a different route, who need a vocational route, who need a specialized route, and so we really, working with our principals, our high school principals, and our guidance counselors, have tried to eliminate that stigma and help kids to pursue their interests. And so we have more gen ed kids that are going the OTEC route that are ending up with apprenticeship jobs because of some of the partnerships that we've done. I partner with one of our directors who oversees our grants, and she and I have worked with the apprenticeship county with the Michigan Works, My Bright Futures, if you're familiar with that, and we're getting more and more of our kids who are pursuing these apprenticeships through OTEC and other campuses and other pursuits. And so it can be a viable option for special education students, but gen ed students as well. But it all starts with kind of that philosophical change in how we guide students towards post-secondary options.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we live in a very globally shrinking world. Our kids, our students, they have access to information in nanoseconds. They have access to programs and organizations and even people. So we can really say it is a globally shrinking, diverse world in which they are living. So how would you define, this is a two-part question, how would you define diversity? What does it mean to you? Describe your experience with diversity in your inclusion in your previous districts, and also the district climate survey that we gave our stakeholders indicated that the achievement and opportunity gap is of significant concern for many stakeholders here in BPS. What will you use to measure the success of closing those gaps? And I can repeat any part. I know it was a rather long question, so I can.
I think I have it. You can remind me if I don't get it all, but there are multiple answers to this. So first of all, when you talk about diversity, diversity is such a wide, kind of broad term. And when we say kind of a blanket statement that we value diversity or it's one of our core values, we really need to define it and mean it. So it's not just along the lines of racial or religious aspects, it's along the lines of disability, gender, whatever category, whatever metric we want to use, we really need to kind of embrace that. I think that where you come from and your personal experiences, your professional experiences, really define who you are when it comes to diversity. And while some things can be learned, when you experience diversity, you work in diverse places, you work in a global market, you just naturally have an advantage that you're more comfortable having the conversations. And in leadership, a lot of the work that's been done around the county here in Oakland County on culturally competent teaching, which I know that you're doing, I know that you have a diversity plan, well-intended people are still uncomfortable in those conversations because they don't have the personal experience or background. So I preface that by giving you just a little kind of intro into my background. So I sit before you. I don't know if you'll find a person who has my type of diversity. So I sit before you, the one and only, other than my sister, Puerto Rican Youper. So my father is from the island of Puerto Rico, was from the island of Puerto Rico. And to make a long story short, as Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens, he joined the Air Force coming out of high school. And of all the places they could have sent a kid from the island, they sent him to Case Sawyer Air Force Base in the Upper Peninsula in Michigan. So he met my mother, a true Youper with German and Finnish ancestry, and that was our beginning. So I had a wonderful childhood, you know, in the island, in Puerto Rico with all of my family, and in New York and Miami, but also in the Upper Peninsula. And of all the places they could have landed after he got out of the Air Force to get a job is Southfield. So I grew up in the 70s in Southfield, where it was incredibly diverse, wonderfully diverse. You had, for the first time, biracial families. You had a lot of African-American families, Jewish families, Chaldean, Filipino. I had Cambodian friends who were fleeing that war-torn region. So all of that has kind of helped me appreciate and value diversity. And so when you lead a building, and you look at kids, and you look at teachers and how we interact with kids, all of that gives you kind of that framework of advocating for all kids, right? So when you transfer it to, so that's kind of my background. When you transfer that to my experience and how my belief and my background transfers into action, I've always been an advocate for diversity initiatives. When I was an assistant principal at Andover High School, my first job, I took the first group of students from Bloomfield Hills to Farmington Public Schools who were members of the Minority Student Achievement Network, which I know Birmingham is a part of. So I brought these Bloomfield kids to Farmington, and the Farmington kids ran this whole cultural competency conference by themselves. And so we very intentionally tried to work on that and partner. So shortly after that, Oakland County started an organization called OSAN, the Oakland Student Achievement Network, modeled after MSAN. So here I was, an assistant principal, sitting around the table with superintendents, and OSAN was started in Oakland County to address the achievement gap. So for over 15 years, I've been on that committee with superintendents. OSAN, that then the name changed to LACO, the Learning Achievement Coalition of Oakland County. It's still a superintendent's group, and that I still serve on. But that effort, those efforts of not only working with community members to try to address the achievement gap, has been just a lifelong mission of mine administratively. How it transfers over into working with students is we created student groups as an extension. A big goal of the minority student achievement gap that you're probably familiar with is the mission is to eliminate the predictability of race and class in performance. And unfortunately, it still is a predictor. And so we've worked with students to do student climate surveys, to interview how they view their teachers, how their teachers view them. That kind of work morphed into the cultural competency teaching work that you're doing now. A good friend and dear colleague of mine, Dr. Jay Marks at Oakland Schools, who runs this for the county districts, he and I partner on these efforts with student groups. And we also have expanded things like our African American parent networks in all the school districts I've worked at, our special education PAC groups, our political or our parent advocacy groups for that inclusion as well. And I understand you have a Latino group here now too, so I didn't know that, or I would have joined it. But now you have LaFan and AFAN as well. So my background defines who I am and how I view acceptance and celebration of diversity. It transfers into action by how you lead because of the things that you take priority in and that you make happen, essentially make happen in your district. I'm most proud of working with a few key principals in Walled Lake. We're a leader in Oakland County on the social justice action plans. So Dr. Marks runs a social justice session. It's a 4-part session over the school year. So we have in the last 6 years, we've been active members. We've trained people at all 19 of our schools, principals, counselors, teachers. Now we've expanded it to the curriculum directors, which I know is also part of your diversity plan, is to have more authentic diversity in your curriculum. So we got our curriculum people involved and our administrators involved. So how does this stay alive? It stays alive because people like the superintendent that I work with and myself keep it alive. At leadership team meetings every month with all of our directors, our 50, 60 principals, assistant principals, there's a standing agenda item about social justice and diversity. And when your superintendent says it matters and you show that it's not just a 2-hour diversity training, it transfers into a philosophy, a mindset. And then when you have the opportunity to hire people into your organization, you hire people who have that same mindset, and you train them and you support them. So I know that was a little bit of a long answer, but it's a complex question. It's a very important question, and I know that a lot of well-intended people have tried hard to address the achievement gap. The one thing in the last 2 years we've changed in LACO, in the new group, is to really look more at the opportunity gap than the achievement gap. Because if you think of an achievement gap, when we all started after No Child Left Behind, disaggregating data, that's a summative result, right? That's after. And you almost can't do anything then. The opportunity gap gets into things like removing obstacles to honors and AP courses, looking at kind of those prerequisites. What are some of the things that we can do to encourage more students of color and of other groups, of other subgroups that historically have not been as exposed? What are the opportunities that they're missing? And what we do at the county level is we look at across the district, we share around the table. What are you doing in Hazel Park? What are you doing in Royal Oak? What are you doing in Birmingham and other places to try to address the opportunity gap? So it's a challenge, and the frustrating news is that despite all of our efforts, not a lot of people have been able to really close those gaps significantly. You look at one of the best models is Shaker Heights outside of Cleveland, who have made fundamental changes, and they've been able to address that gap in fundamental ways. But we're still steadily moving along and trying to do the best that we can.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So as a district, we have excelled in a variety of areas, and I believe personally, and I'm sure my peers share this, is that it's due to our exceptional staff and the leadership that we have within the district. And as you may be aware, many of our staff and our educators have been recognized, by state, nationally, internationally in some ways, and they're considered thought leaders. And I'm curious to know and would like to better understand, how will you cultivate those thought leaders? How will you ensure that those stars can shine in the areas that they excel in? And also, if you could talk a little bit about your management style, that would be great.
Sure. Well, you're absolutely correct. There are incredible educators here and everywhere, but certainly our experience with our own children going through, we have been extremely satisfied. I think part of the goal of encouraging people to kind of grow and expand and be leaders is to really set the culture in your district of being able to pursue stretch goals with their kids, stretch goals for themselves, and allows teachers to take the risks that they need to. Right now, we have to be cognizant of how extremely vulnerable teachers feel sometimes with the new evaluation system. There's a lot of fear and anxiety out there about the evaluation system and the elimination of tenure and seniority as a status. And so when people are nervous about that, they're less and less apt to be a thought leader, to try to lead peers, to try to pursue other aspects. So first and foremost, it comes down to relationships, and this kind of gets into my management style. You can't do anything without relationships. You can't move initiatives along without trust. And so if people know you and they trust you and they know that your goal for them is to help them grow and to help them pursue these wonderful things that they do, then you need to support that. And so my management style is absolutely not a micromanager, but I'm a trust and verify kind of guy. I'm a systems person. I have periodic meetings with those who report to me to have them present kind of data updates. We have benchmark metrics for goal planning on that. And so I'm able to kind of hold that accountability throughout the year while also encouraging them to encourage their teachers to grow. The other thing with respect to kind of internal leadership teams is their development of their own leadership teams at the building level. You know, when you share that, when you kind of model that, of working with our principals and working with some of our subgroups. We have principals who are working on social justice groups, restorative justice groups, they're working on curriculum initiatives, and so when you kind of model that to help them grow and help them be leaders within their ranks among their peers as principals, they can replicate that with their teachers. So, and then obviously the other thing is supporting their involvement in state and national conferences and organizations. There's wonderful research around, and when you have the ability, again, from a budget standpoint, when you have the ability to send people to conferences to present all over the state or the country, not only do they feel like the professionals that they are, but then they come back and they share that with other people. And when you look, these are the decisions that are difficult for you as a board and for us to make administrative recommendations is, you know, do we look at it as an expense or an investment? And if you want thought leaders and if you want to be a lighthouse district and you want to continue to be progressive, you have to manage that way. You manage from the heart, you manage with relationships, you manage with support, but you also manage with accountability. We can't just send people to conferences and have them come back and we don't know, you know, whether or not it was effective. So that's kind of my management style. I think if you asked our principals, and I would encourage you to do, call anybody in Walled Lake, call my principals and ask them. I think if you ask them what kind of leader I am and what I'm like to work for, I think that they would say that I push them to be their best, that I require a system of goal setting that I believe in and periodic checks on the status of your goals because I want them to be their best. The whole good to great is a philosophy I live into personally and professionally and with those that I work with and who work for me. So that's kind of my management style.
I have a follow-up question to that. So what happens when a thought leader has an idea that falls outside of the system or the processes that you've put in place? How will you approach that?
Well, with everything, you can't be too inflexible. If the idea is too far-fetched that it doesn't align with our strategic plan or the district goals or something, I guess it depends on how far outside the line it is that you can take an exciting idea. So, I hate to use the answer that it's a case-by-case basis, but you have to really kind of investigate the merits of it. What you don't want to do, again, there's a nuance to saying no if you have to say no. And what you don't want to do is stifle that creativity, right? And so you might want to ask, is there a portion of this that we could pursue? We've had a few teachers who have come with us with proposals about wonderful kind of service opportunities that they wanted to create. And unfortunately, even though we believe in them in Walled Lake, we didn't have the money to do that. So there's a way to try to say, no, we can't do this full-fledged plan, but we might be able to have some release time for you to do X, Y, or Z. So it's trying to work with people to the extent that you can and still align to your district plans. But in terms of the structure, the management, there's no rigidity at all. I'm very, very flexible. I'm very open, very adaptable to entertaining any idea. I'll speak with anyone about any idea.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Director, can you tell us a little bit about how you work with the board and maybe specifically how you keep them informed between meetings and how that process, the communication process works, and how you work with the board?
Absolutely. So currently, in my role as Deputy Superintendent, we adhere to a very, very strict governance. And so everything really goes through our superintendent. And so outside of board meetings, I don't personally speak with any board members on the phone or anything like that, even in the deputy role. Now, obviously, in all the meetings that we have in the subcommittees, they know me, I know them, we talk about a lot of things. But formally, I don't communicate with them in that sense. From a superintendent standpoint, I work every day with our superintendent, and he speaks to them daily, keeping them updated. What we do as a cabinet, the 7 of us, is that we communicate any and everything that we think the board needs to know in very timely fashion. So I'm the one who gets the first call if there's any safety issue or a crisis, and so I immediately, after we resolve it with law enforcement and principals, my next step is to write kind of an executive summary that I send to our superintendent, who gets out to the board. And in the meantime, he's working the phones to all of you, or all the board members, letting them know, hey, Dr. Delgado is working on an issue, you're going to get an update, you may start hearing from parents about this. From a superintendent standpoint, you look at the typical weekly kind of board bulletin, the email correspondence that gives you kind of the lowdown from every cabinet member, but then a lot of that is phone conversations and staying in touch with your board members. And depending on your style of governance, sometimes it all goes through the president, sometimes the board is comfortable with independent conversations that then the superintendent would communicate and email back that a board member asked a question about such and such. Here are the answers that my cabinet provided. So I would envision the same thing. And again, with a fairly new board, to go through that Board Governance 101 that MASA or the other ones offer that you've probably all been through before, but to have some kind of governance conversation, I think it's actually a pretty exciting time for Birmingham. With your board and your new superintendent, your new strategic plan, it's really exciting about setting the vision for this district. And so that's how I would envision having that communication.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Round 3, here we go. Do you need a minute? Are we good?
I'm good.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about the evaluation of professional staff and maybe hone in specifically on teachers, since that, we talk curriculum top down, but now talking about teaching and learning in the classroom. What's your philosophy, your thoughts about teacher evaluations, what they bring to the table? How have you been involved in that from an implementation perspective in any of your roles over the last number of years? And again, any of your thoughts about Birmingham going forward, what it might mean to go to the next level in this whole area of teacher evals?
Sure. Well, again, I alluded to the fact that there's a lot of concern right now. There's a lot of legitimate fear when it comes down to teacher evaluation. And so part of it is process, part of it is the art of leadership, of relationships, and making people feel comfortable that an evaluation should be a professional conversation. So in terms of teacher evaluation in Walled Lake, we use the Danielson model. I know that Birmingham uses the 5D. Any of the models that you use, whether it's Marzano or the 5D or their teacher evaluation, the purpose of teacher evaluation should be about growth. It should be about teachers setting goals that are related to their content based on data and helping them grow instructionally. And so I've been involved in not so much in Walled Lake directly with teacher evaluation, but when I was a principal in Bloomfield Hills, with setting up a system, regardless of what the instrument is, setting up a system that begins with a goal-setting session at the beginning of the year. I believe in goal setting, annual goal setting, whether it's required or not, and so I start with a goal session that is based in data, and actually I replicated this, I do this with our principals, with all 19 principals, and then the director of athletics and director of special education. But procedurally, I start with a goal-setting meeting where we talk about kind of where they want to grow, how they want to grow their instruction, what their data is telling them, and then we have periodic meetings depending on capacity issues. Right now with 21 people, I meet with them every couple of months, but with a smaller group of teachers, I might meet with them monthly. But teacher evaluation is about growth, but the most important part of the evaluation is that feedback. It's that conversation, that timely feedback. Any teacher knows that when an administrator's in his or her classroom, they want to know, how did I do? You know, how am I, you know, what's the feedback? And so oftentimes I see the mistakes sometimes that administrators make is they don't give that prompt feedback back. So I think in terms of moving forward, it's cultivating an environment of professional growth conversations that eliminates that fear. Just procedurally, one of the ways you can do that is if you're a principal and you come in and teacher doesn't have the best evaluation, you don't necessarily have to count that one. You come back multiple times. But again, if they don't trust you, if you don't have that relationship, you're not going to get that benefit of doubt. So teacher evaluation, there are compliance pieces that we have to do with the state, but there's also a bigger conversation about what the whole purpose is. And I think that your best leaders communicate that purpose sincerely, and people believe them, and those people in those organizations grow. And again, with my principals, the 19 principals, I've had excellent professional conversations all year long. So there's no gotcha. They're not surprised in June with a performance evaluation. If there are areas of concern in February, I document those, I put them in writing, but we have had a real professional conversation over the years. And I've seen principals that I've been with for 8 years who have really, really grown. And again, if you were able to speak to any of them, they could talk about that process that I've been able to do with them. But I just think, you know, at the core, administrators need to recognize that the stakes are really high for teachers in Michigan. And they're worried about that, and they need that support, they need that trust and that benefit of the doubt. Gets back to the risk-taking question. You know, how are they going to take risks if they think they're going to get dinged on an evaluation, right? And so regardless of your instrument, it's about that relationship and that conversation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
A little bit of a follow-up on really, I guess, the last couple of questions, and certainly Steve's. It sounds like you feel like the staff has, one of the big obstacles is fear. Fear of evaluation or performance, whatever it might be, that can limit creativity or taking risks. And I think I understand that, but if you could talk a little bit more about that in the context of also communicating accountability and performance on the by the district, and I mean in all parts, not just classroom staff, but administrative staff. Not everything goes perfectly all the time. And could you talk a little bit about how you view communicating the less effective outcomes to the community? And that could be from classroom to administration to, we have a bond project, projects that have been going for quite a while, and communicating to the community exactly what is taking place, the bad news along with the good news. And sort of a follow-up on Steve's question is, how do you view the overall assessment of the district in that not every individual, not every project can be successful? So you're going to have some portion of the district's efforts that don't succeed or that are not being executed at a level that fits into what we would desire, and how do you communicate that to the community?
Okay, so a few parts there. So I guess let me clarify one thing. acknowledging that some teachers might have anxiety over a high-stakes teacher evaluation does not mean that you shy away from having difficult conversations, right? It does not mean that you don't hold people accountable and you have those difficult conversations. Indeed, most of us who've been in leadership, we don't wear as any badge of honor, the number of people that we've either let go or demoted or encouraged out of the profession because they weren't doing things that were good for kids. So we don't wear that as any badge of honor, but your quality leaders have all done that. We've all done that. We've had the difficult conversations. We've taken steps that we needed to when we needed to. There's a need in administration, whether it's a superintendent or a principal or assistant principal, there's a need for courage. And a lot of people don't have courage, unfortunately, in these roles. So how you communicate it, I think it's two things, because you started with teachers and you went broader. It's, first of all, being transparent. I've listened to the board meetings. As a parent, I understand that that's something that the community is yearning for, is a little bit more transparency, and so you own it. If there are programs that aren't working as well, you own it, you try to analyze it, and you're transparent with people about the aspects within that program. And if you have to have difficult conversations or make difficult decisions about the discontinuation of a program, or the removal of a person from a position, or those, you need courage in that leadership. And indeed, the superintendent has to do that. In Walled Lake, working with our superintendent, myself, he and I, we've made some changes over the last 8 years administratively that have not all been popular, that have made people nervous. We've moved around some administrators, and we've done it for the right reasons because it was good for kids, but that sometimes makes people nervous. So again, you can be cognizant of fear and anxiety and try to be supportive of people, but at the end of the day, we're the ones who have to have those difficult conversations, and I'm completely comfortable having those kind of conversations, and accountability is something I expect for myself, and I expect for people who work with and for me.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Delgado, you and I talked about OTEC a couple of questions back. And I'm interested, whether it be from your experience in Walled Lake, but you also know the community here. What are some untapped opportunities you see connecting, like I said, either Walled Lake or Birmingham to third parties, not just for this idea of, oh, there's an alternative to college, but also as a stepping stone for college? Some professional experience that helps hone in on somebody's ultimate major in college or gives them an idea of what they do or don't want to do. So you gave OTEC as an example. Is there something that's not yet here, a relationship with a school or an institution that you see, or with the businesses in the community that you see as a real possibility for us here, or, like I said, if it's easier to answer from Walled Lake perspective?
Sure. Well, first of all, the Royal Oak campus that services Birmingham has an excellent program. They have the clusters that I think are wonderful aspects for kids. I mentioned the My Bright Works. Oakland County, and not just Oakland Technical Center, but Oakland County and the My Bright Works, there's a whole push towards grant-based opportunities for apprenticeships, not only during the school year, but in the summer. There are high school kids who are getting apprenticeships that are paid apprenticeships, $16, $17 an hour, to work towards a field they might be interested in. And so, again, I think, from a superintendent standpoint, working to establish those connections with people throughout the county, throughout the state, throughout our region is part of the job that I could do to bring back more opportunity to partner for kids in our district. The other thing is, when you look at kind of these partnerships, one of the things that I'll have to do if I'm able to join this district is to look at the local business community and partner with the principal shopping district, with other members in the area, to understand what are some of those untapped resources. Oftentimes our PTAs can be a wonderful source of contact with our parent community. We've done some of that. We have more industrial aspects over in Walled Lake and Wixom. There's more industry that we try to partner with, not only for our students who are not looking at university, we actually partner for our transitions program as well, for our adult education program as well. So there are opportunities for those parameters.
And has a great indoor soccer venue as well, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Total
as a
Soccer
player.
Wixom?
Yes, yes.
Yes. So I am an avid soccer player.
I saw that.
That's my
Yeah.
stress relief. That's
Yeah.
the 2 hours that I don't think about anything when I'm competing and still trying to chase around kids. So, but I think that the partnerships that you can make with some of those communities, that's something that I would have to, even though, you know, I'm from this area, I would have to establish those communities. But I would not underestimate the impact right now of Oakland County. They've really been a leader in the state of trying to pursue and push these apprenticeships. And at the state level, too, you're probably aware, there's career-focused education money that's coming from the state, CTE flexibility. There's so much that is really an untapped resources in a lot of places. And I think philosophically, I remember years ago when I was teaching at Seaholm, you know, and at Andover, when I was an assistant principal at Andover in Bloomfield Hills, there's such competitive academic environments for kids. And if you're not that kid who is pursuing, you know, those high-level universities, sometimes it's tough to exist, right? And so as counselors and as principals and as teachers, we can help pursue these partnerships. And these are really, really great opportunities that I think are mostly untapped in most of our schools in Oakland County.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So having our workforce, our larger workforce, in every capacity here in Birmingham work so well collectively, it has proven to be very effective. And I mean, for example, if you walked into a building on any given day, you could see teacher with teacher collaboration, you could see administration with teacher collaboration, you will see administration with parent collaboration, you will see a leadership team in their collaborative teams, and then branch out into the buildings and with the teachers and with the parents. And this is something, as I mentioned, it's a point of pride for us. So how do you see yourself fitting into this collaborative style?
Sure. So I guess the first thing I'll say is that when you come into a new position, even if it's the top position, you don't become a change agent just to make change, right? The first role is to really kind of analyze the efficacy of those programs. I know, for example, you have the SALT committee and you have the leadership team committees. You have a lot of different highly functioning committees. But in the same way that when I was a principal, I came in and I analyzed every aspect of my building to see, are we really doing team planning as intended? We used to say that we had professional learning communities, PLCs, but when you look at the standards for PLCs, we weren't really doing them with fidelity. So I think you take a fresh look at everything, and you don't just change to change or say that you're bringing in a new program. And if you find that they're highly functioning, they're doing things with fidelity over the course of years, then my role would really be to celebrate that, to support that, to maintain that, whether it's structural or otherwise. Again, some of this comes down to financial decisions. This is another hard decision that we had to make in Walled Lake, is we were one of the only school districts that still had middle school team planning. So teachers had an individual planning and a team planning for PLCs, and we cut it. We had to cut it. And I had it in Bloomfield Hills, and it was wonderful once we scrutinized it and we improved it, right? And so, so I think part of that is just kind of looking at with fresh eyes. I'm very analytical. I'm very systems-based. I believe in structures, but I also believe that you can put parameters in place, whether they're protocols for those meetings or, to your point about accountability, is so you have team planning. What's the result of this team planning? How is it better for kids? And that's something I would expect of principals, that they expect of their teachers. So, you know, part of that is just kind of analyzing what's working and what's not, and ultimately, if you have to eliminate or make some changes, then you recommend those changes.
So you're coming into a district where finances is a topic of conversation, but it's not as if, you know, Birmingham doesn't have enough money to bring forth a great idea that may come from a thought leader in our district,
Sure.
right? So
Sure.
we're not in a scenario at which there's a great idea if it's going to impact kids in a positive way, you know, that you won't be able to pursue that. our citizens, including myself and everyone that lives in our community, we've invested in our community in a number of ways through bond dollars, through, you name it. And if we go into the hold harmless, which I'm hoping you're familiar with, we're contributing over half of the foundation allowance that we're receiving, right? So we live in a community at which we want to see a return on our investment. We want to make sure that we're seeing that the investment is something where we're being good stewards of that. Help me understand how you will use the money wisely. Use it in a way that citizens can be proud of, and put us in a better today or better tomorrow than we are today approach.
Well, I appreciate the question, and I know, Ms. Thomas, that you're on the research collaborative in the state of Michigan that talks about per pupil funding, right? And so that's really important when you look at the amount of money that should be invested for students to have a quality education. And it really is about being stewards of taxpayer money. And so part of it, in terms of using it wisely, is for us to look at kind of committees that make those decisions and involvement from the proper stakeholders for kind of that return on investment, trying to find the metrics for the program. I mentioned before that I teach a course on program evaluation. And so when you evaluate programs, again, you're looking at, is the program being implemented with fidelity to get the results that you proposed it would? Is that investment coming to fruition? And so part of that, we're notorious in education that we don't do that very often, right? We don't evaluate. We're as quick to adopt a program as we are to abandon a program, right? And most research will show that any program needs about 2 to 4 years to really come to fruition if you monitor it and you have that accountability. And I think sometimes what we do in schools is we get excited about something, and there are really 7 stages to the proper implementation of a program, but we explore it, we adopt it, we get excited about it, and then we step back from it, right? And so getting back to your question about how we use our money wisely, it's making sure that we follow that entire process of evaluating the sustainability of a program and measuring the efficacy of it. Now, not everything is black and white in education. We alluded to it a little bit earlier in the strategic plan question. When you say you want students to reach their full potential, we mean that, but can we measure that or put a dollar value on it? Maybe not. And I think, as I say to our principals, sometimes we have to be a little comfortable in the gray, but we still need to be stewards of the taxpayer money and make sure that we're in a good situation. You're in an excellent financial situation. I mean, 15% fund balance or thereabouts is a wonderful place to be. It's called a rainy day fund, but depending on who you ask, there could be thunderstorms, right? We all think it's raining when we have a special interest. So there are structural things that you've done and the boards before you have done to keep the district in a really good place. But we also have to be cognizant about any kind of new investments and making sure that at the end of the day that we're extremely transparent with our community, making sure that they're involved on committees. My experience with budget, I'm one of 7 people on our cabinet that we oversee. Walled Lake has about $154 million budget. And so I work every year on the budget committee, and then after our initial meetings where we kind of analyze our respective departments. So I oversee special education. We have about $25 million in special education, $2 million in athletics. So after each cabinet member presents their kind of analysis of their budget, then I actually meet with our assistant superintendent of business, she and I, to oversee the student enrollment process. So we have 2 demographers, one from Michigan State and one from Plant Moran, and she and I analyze the projections over the next 7 years of where our budget's going to be. And I'm sure you, of all people, know the revenue conference planning and the whole process of budget, and so she and I monitor that up to the June 30th requirement when we pass the budget, and then I work with her quarterly on any amendments. And so I have experience working in that, and what we do is not only kind of work collaboratively on that, we obviously keep our board informed, but we keep our community informed by doing budget presentations. So from February to May or so, we'll kind of go on the road. We do our budget roadshow, we call it, and so members of cabinet will go to PTA meetings, we'll go to community forums, we'll do some at the local library, some at schools in the morning, in the evening, and we'll present the proposed budget. And then people are able to give their feedback. We have an open email line for people that want to talk about budget priorities. So I think involvement in the right committees, being transparent about where the money's going, and then also explaining, go back to something I said before, explaining to people what you view as an expense versus an investment. And so I think that's really important. And if I, as a superintendent, believe in something for our district that I think ultimately is good for kids, and it's worth the investment, then I'm going to stand up and I'm going to say that, and I'm going to communicate that. That might be an example of something that people disagree with me on. That doesn't mean that we have to cease conversation. It just means that we believe this is good for kids and we're going to move forward with it.
Thank
So,
you, I
I know it's
appreciate
kind of roundabout, but.
No, it
hopefully
answered it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Listen, could you give me an example of maybe not a failure, but where you've kind of fallen short in administration level, and how you reacted to that, how you managed to overcome that? Just give me an example of how kind of you've fallen short a little bit. You tried, but you kind of fell short, but then how did you react to that?
Sure. Well, one of my admitted weaknesses is I'm extremely impatient. And so when I believe that something is the right program or it's a good program, I want to push through and I want to get that program implemented. So there have been a couple of kind of curriculum startups. When I was back here, I taught Spanish at Beverly Elementary and at Seaholm High School, and so and with my family, you know, my father from Puerto Rico, you know, I value the culture and language acquisition. And so I have always been a proponent of proficiency-based world language instruction. And so if you think of any of you who've taken languages, people say, I took 4 years of German or 4 years of French and I can't speak a lick, right? Proficiency-based is about creating opportunities for kids to actually produce language and communicate. So with this background and this personal interest and wanting to get it to the younger kids as quickly as I can, when I came into Walled Lake, I said, we're moving to proficiency-based language. It's better, that's what our state organization says, that's what our national organization says, and so full steam ahead. I oversee the K-12 elective curriculum, and so I immediately got a small group of teachers to work in the summer on curriculum revision. And within probably a year or so, we had teachers that were so nervous about losing their textbook and losing the way that they teach that there was some significant pushback. And so what I learned very quickly, and my superintendent has helped me realize this about the difference between being a building principal and being a superintendent, a central office, is it's not like riding a jet ski where you can make a quick turn. When you're leading an organization, you're leading the cruise ship. You've got to really get people to turn and understand the philosophy. So that was a mistake I made. I backed off of that. I started with professional development, and what I should have known, and I just was impatient and excited about it, what I should have known is you have to explain the why to people before you ask them to do the how, right? To implement it. And so we went back. I didn't give up on it. We went back and we started with the why. Philosophically, this is why it's good for kids. This is what our national and state organizations are saying. This is how you achieve bilingualism. That's going to be part of a global preparation for our kids to go to college and go on in this global world. And so we went back. I expanded the group from 3 to 5 teachers to 12 teachers. We brought in university professors from the University of Michigan who were world language professors and Oakland County officials to come present. And a little frustrating, but you know, they said the same things I said, right? But that external credibility, that validity sometimes helps when you get a professor. I'm a professor too, but you get a different professor, and so I'm not the talking head. But so long story short, we now have achieved that in French, German, and Spanish. We're very proud of it. We rewrote the entire curriculum. We have units of studies. Our teachers are no longer textbook dependent. Now, I personally loved conjugating verbs and doing vocab lists, but our kids don't just do that to be doing that. They're actually creating language. But that was a mistake I made early in my career, and I tried to push forward too quickly, and I've learned from that you have to really involve people in the decisions that affect them at the practitioner level.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Trustees, before we wrap up, are there any follow-up questions that we would like to ask Dr. Delgado?
I always have one, and
That's
I do.
okay. Go for it.
One more. I didn't put all my questions like in one, like everybody else did.
Sure.
So it's easy for us to rest on our own laurels. I mean, Birmingham has great success, and we have all the numbers that everyone believes that we should have. You talked about a little bit about good to great. I like to talk about who moved my cheese.
All right.
And I'm curious to know, how will you move beyond that? I mean, education is changing. There are a lot of things that are changing right before our eyes in education, and we're good. But how can we accelerate? How can we go to the next level? And how do you think you can achieve that, knowing what you know about our district?
Sure. A couple of answers to that. So first of all, I mentioned before systems, and so goal setting, annual goal setting with each person in your organization, having them set personal goals that are stretch goals. That process, if you adhere to it with fidelity and conversation throughout the year, that helps us all grow every single year. We get better at something every single year if we're required to pursue goals. The second thing, though, and knowing the scores, I know the scores, I know where we are in Birmingham, our graduation rates and the scores, but innovation, you talked about kind of encouraging that risk-taking. That innovation, creating that environment where teachers are looking to expand can really help. Well, one real concrete thing, and I don't know enough about it, I'd have to learn more, is expanding our partnerships with our universities and our colleges. Michigan has such a wealth of small and large colleges, public-private colleges that are doing incredible things all over the state. And the extent that we can partner with them. I was at Michigan State on Saturday to see my son in the marching band there, and they're redoing the power plant with a complete STEM program at Michigan State. So that research, that STEM connection, that I know we talk about STEM and STEAM, but expanding those partnerships to universities and colleges with our innovative teachers, with our thought leaders, that's something that down the line we could probably do a better job of. And again, I'd need to learn more about what partnerships already exist. In Walled Lake, we only have a few. We have one with Wayne State University. It's a math support program for students that are a little deficient, but it's a research-based program with Wayne State that have helped some of our students get caught up. You know, by the time they get to high school, that Michigan Merit Curriculum math is so hard, and so this is something that's helping the achievement gap and helping that. But we don't have many partnerships beyond that, but that might be an opportunity for us to expand the good to great conversation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
One more? Sure. So let's peer through the equity lens a little bit more. As a trustee, any one of the 7 of us are as likely on a given day to get cards and letters articulating why their student needs some kind of remedial help as we are to get cards and letters about why we don't have more programming for gifted and talented. And in theory, any good RTI program could address both, right? If we differentiate and specialize in instruction, we're going to help all children right where they're at. But in practice, that's hard. We don't have unlimited time. We don't have unlimited money. The poor teacher in the classroom is at the crossroads of all these programs, right? It's hard to implement. What are your thoughts for Birmingham specifically about what you would push if you come to BPS in terms of that spectrum, right? Whether it's the gap kids or the gifted and talented. By the way, it might be the same child in 2 different subjects,
Sure,
right?
sure.
At the same time. What do you push, and how do you communicate that in a community that's affluent, high expectation, highly engaged? It's a real asset. We love that every single day. But you have a challenge there, right, to push and to communicate. How do you go about that in Birmingham? What are your first thoughts? I know you haven't presented a 90-day plan yet, but how would you think about that?
Sure. So the first thought that comes to mind is expanding kind of the depth of opportunities for certain students. You're very right that logistically differentiation is very challenging to do in a classroom. It's not impossible, but depending on the gap within your classroom, it's very, very challenging. Just a word on honors, and I know that we didn't talk about math tonight, and that's fine, and the honors, but the way that you look at honors or deeper application of knowledge is a good example of how the college model uses honors. Honors is not just about going faster, doing more in a shorter amount of time. It should theoretically be about depth. So, for example, at the colleges, at Michigan State, to graduate with honors over the course of 4 years, you have to do 8 expanded research, deep kind of analytical projects. And so, again, theoretically, if you teach a course that's a rigorous course that has depth of learning, application of knowledge, application of skills to all kids, and then you're able to help the kids who need some reteaching, whether it's through X-Block or other kind of interventions that you have, but then have these expanded opportunities within that class structure for the students who need that differentiation, that application model, that, you know, that collaborative model with a couple of other students, you can expand those opportunities. You know, when you look at any kind of cultures of thinking or the depth of knowledge, you know, the highest form of learning is application of knowledge to an unfamiliar scenario. And so for some students, they're not going to get to the DOK-4, right? They're going to learn the content and they're going to get through it, and that's going to be sufficient for where their learning their level is. But when you look at that high-level differentiation, we had the same challenge in Bloomfield Hills. We always got criticized for not helping the kids who are you know, higher achievers and not stimulating them because we were focusing more on the students who weren't. So I look at it a little differently in terms of how we do it. Some things, naturally, you have different classes that you can take, but you can expand those opportunities to really have something more meaningful for the students to do that applies their knowledge at a deeper level than some of their classmates. And that's kind of where my mind is right now on that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Trustees, anything else? Okay. All right, thank you, Dr. Delgado. Again, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Any closing statements or remarks?
I just have one, if you'll indulge me.
Sure.
So again, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. I'm honored to be considered to lead this wonderful school community. So I just have a final point to share with you. I think that knowing oneself matters when you aspire to a position like this. For 24 years, I've worked for and with superintendents from multiple states. I've been observant of their positive and negative attributes and modeled my vision for who I'll be accordingly. I think the best superintendents know employees personally. They value them, they support them, they cultivate their continued education. The best superintendents are highly accessible, highly visible and supportive of all programs in the district and all community events. The best superintendents have instructional vision and they're inspirational. They remind people why they do what they do and remind them why they chose to be an educator. This is the best career. It's the best profession to be in. The best superintendents value parents and find ways to involve them on more than just superficial levels. They really work to try to involve parents. And the best superintendents surround themselves with a quality team, a strong team, and they continue to try to develop those people within the organization and hold them accountable, all for the benefit of children. So I know I'm a deputy, I can't do anything about that, but I've prepared immensely. I've finished the Michigan Leadership Superintendent Academy that actually Mr. Silveri helps run, and so I've done as much preparation as I can. I've rubbed elbows with a lot of superintendents, and I know the type of superintendent that I will be. So I hope to have an opportunity to speak with you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, trustees, we're going to take a 10-minute recess. We're going to start back up at 7 o'clock sharp. Thank you.